Hi everyone, it's Miss Rossi. Today we're going to finish our Robert Indiana inspired positive word pictures. What you'll be needing today is your paper from last week, so this should be your positive word paper where you wrote each letter inside one of the boxes after we folded it. We traced our letters and then we added designs in the backgrounds and inside our letters that were different. You're also going to need something to color your picture in with today. I'm going to use some crayons and watercolor paints to color in my picture, but you can use any other material you have at home to color if you do not have these. We're going to create a watercolor resist where I'm going to color in my letters using my crayons, and I'm going to trace over my background details also in my crayons and then fill the rest in with my watercolor. Now wherever I use my crayons, they are going to resist the watercolor, meaning they are not going to let the watercolor cover over it. So in all of those spaces, we'll still be able to see our crayon designs even if I start to paint over it with my watercolor. So to get started, I'm just going to grab some crayons and I am just going to color in and trace the designs inside my letters only to start. Now you can trace and color in your designs however you would like. Yours does not have to look like mine. I'm just going to start at my H and start by just tracing over my pencil lines just so they have a little bit of color and it's easier to see. Now in order for our watercolor resist to work, we do need a pretty solid foundation of our crayons. So that means we want a good amount of crayon wax and color on our paper. So as you're noticing, I'm going back and forth over these sections to make sure my crayon is nice and dark and easy to see. We don't want a lot of white space in our crayon coloring because all of that white space can get filled in with our watercolor. So that's what my H looks like all finished. I traced over my pencil lines with my pink crayon and then I went in with that blue and green and filled in the rest of the space. And now you'll notice that even though I did choose light colors to fill in the background with the green and the blue, the space is still fully colored in. There is no white space in there because again, we don't want that white space. Otherwise our watercolor is going to get in there and we don't want that to happen. So now I'm just going to pick another color and I am just going to trace over my background design. So I have this purple and I'm just going to carefully trace over all of my little bubble shapes that I have in the background. Again, making sure I'm pressing firmly so my color is showing up nice and bright. There's not a lot of white space in my lines of my purple as I'm drawing with it. I just want to make sure I get some nice dark circles. And I'm just going to outline all of these so that once I add my watercolor, they will still show up. Now, if you have some small details, like I have some tiny circles inside some of my bigger circles, I think I'm going to leave those white so then when I do my watercolor on top, they will all get colored in together. But if you have any tiny details that you want to color in that your paintbrush is going to be too big to fit, you can always color those in with your crayons, or again, if you have any spaces that you want colored in but you don't want your watercolor to get in there, you can use your crayons to color in those spaces too to help resist the watercolor from getting in there and mixing together. Now that I'm finished with that first box, I'm going to go in and color in and trace the rest of my letters and trace over the rest of my backgrounds to be similar to my first letter. Now you can stick to the same colors in all of your boxes, or if you want everything to be different colors, it's totally up to you. There is no right or wrong way to color in your picture. It's however you think it's going to look best. So that's my picture now that I finished coloring everything in with my crayons. So again, I outlined all of my background sections with different colored crayons, and I colored in fully my letters to create those patterns. Now all the rest of the white space I have left, I'm going to use my watercolors to fill that in, and I'm going to go kind of box by box and choose how I want to do that. So maybe in certain areas I do want to fill in some of my design and some of my pattern with my watercolors, or maybe I just want to go over the entire thing with one layer of one color. You can decide what you think is going to work best for your picture and just do that. So I wet my paintbrush, I'm swirling in my watercolor paints, and I'm going to start, I think, by my O, because I know I want this one to be blue in the background. And as you can see, as I'm painting right over this section, I'm going to stop at that fold where my O's box ends, so this first little corner I have. And as I'm painting over my crayon is resisting the watercolor. It is preventing the watercolor from covering over it, so I can still see my design nice and clearly through it. So even if you want to just do one layer of one color and not fill in your stripes or your bubbles or your design or whatever it is, you should still be able to see it right through your watercolor paint. And if you think your watercolor paint is coming out too dark, you can always add more water on top and it will lighten it a bit. And I'm just going to go back and forth filling up this entire first box, making sure I'm not leaving any white space. I'm going nice and gently with my paintbrush. And even as I'm going around my letter, since I filled in that entire letter with my crayon, even if my paintbrush accidentally goes in that space, the watercolor will not stick over there. So it will not cover up the nice design I made inside all of my letters. All right, now that this section is filled in, I can move on to another area. So maybe in my E down here, I want to fill in those shapes with a color and then have the background be a different color. Now again, you can decide what you think is going to work best for your picture because it might be different than what mine's going to look like. Before I go into a new color of my watercolor paints, I made sure to clean my brush in the water, and now I can swirl it around carefully in my tray to pick up some color. So I think I'm going to fill in some of my larger blobs here with some dark green, and you can see my crayon is helping my watercolor stay in just these larger shapes that I drew. It's not spreading out towards the rest of my background, which is something great about using crayon and watercolor together as a resist. All right, I'm gonna let that section dry before I go in and start to paint the background of it, because that is a much smaller space and I am a little nervous that it's all gonna start to mix together if that's too wet before I work on it. I'm going to jump into my next section over here by my P, and I think I'm gonna do the same thing I did with my O, where I'm just going to fill in that background with all one color. Again, you can decide what's going to look best for your picture, but the same thing is going to happen like in my O, where my crayon is going to resist my watercolor and I'll still be able to see my design through it. Making sure I'm stopping at that folded edge and just filling in that space. Now that that letter is finished, I can go up to my H and fill in that background. I am just going to start, I think I want the entire background of this to be pink, and I'm going to use a nice light pink, and maybe once that's dry, I might go over the top in some areas with a darker pink, but we'll see how it looks once I'm finished. You can always paint over sections if you make a mistake. You can even let your watercolor dry and color over it with some more crayons if you want. That will cover up any other mistakes that you might make. All right, there we go. I'm going to let that dry, and I'm going to come back to my E because I see most of those bubbles that I painted with my green have dried. I'm going to wash my paintbrush, and I think I want the rest of the background to be more of like a lighter green. So I'm just going to carefully go in and fill in that space. And now, since I did outline those shapes with my crayon, it is going to help prevent my watercolor from going in there and mixing with the color that I put on the inside already. Now that my H is also dry, I'm just going to go back in with some darker pink inside some of my circles. I'm not going to do all of them. I'm just going to pick and choose some here and there. There we go, and that is going to be my Robert Indiana inspired positive word all finished. Once you're done with your project, you can take a photo or video of it and upload it on my Canvas page. I can't wait to see the beautiful, colorful, and positive words you guys have created. Try your best, have fun, and get creative. I'll see you soon. Bye!